Welcome to today's Explainer. We spend most of our lives navigating the economy as consumers, but today, we're literally flipping the script. We're going to decode those exact same market transactions, but entirely through the eyes of the producer. Let's dive right into this.
Picture yourself right here at the street level. Take a look at this Central Park snack cart. Behind that colorful umbrella, there is a real person making some highly calculated choices before a single pretzel is ever handed over to a customer.
Which brings us to the big question. How exactly do they decide what to sell? And, how much of it to actually stock? Because opposite every consumer in a market exchange is a producer. And in a market-based economy, that producer is driven by one primary goal: maximizing profit. They're constantly making these calculated choices based on one major factor above all others: the price tag.
To figure out how they make those choices, we'll quickly walk through 5 key areas today: producers and the price tag, visualizing the supply curve, the fundamental law of supply, 6 major supply shifters, and finally, the elasticity of supply.
All right, Section 1, Producers and the Price Tag, the Rules of Selling.
The absolute most crucial thing to grasp here is a term called quantity supplied, or QS for short. This is simply the amount of a good or service producers are actually willing and able to offer up for sale at a specific price. Let's use Starbucks for a second. Imagine you want to buy lattes for a huge party. If you tell them you're only paying $1 per latte, the profit is basically zero, right? So Starbucks might only be willing to supply, say, 3 lattes. They aren't going to crank up the espresso machines for pennies. But what if you offer $3 a piece? Suddenly, they're super willing to supply 9 lattes.
Moving on to Section 2, Visualizing the Supply Curve, Plotting the Data. Let's see how this builds when we actually put the numbers on paper.
So, this supply schedule right here lays out the producer's mindset perfectly. At $2, Starbucks is willing to supply 6 lattes. But watch what happens as the price bumps up to $4. The quantity they're willing and able to offer suddenly jumps to 12. As the price goes up, the quantity supplied goes right up alongside it.
And when we take that exact data and map it onto a graph, every pair of numbers becomes a coordinate. Connect those dots, and boom, you've got this upward sloping supply curve. It's visual proof that at $3, they are more than happy to do the work and provide the product.
Next up, Section 3, the law of supply. Let's zoom out a bit to see what happens when multiple producers interact.
Now, in the real world, markets obviously have way more than just one producer. To find the overall market supply, you literally just add up the individual quantities from all the competing producers at a given price. Let's shift gears to a taco market. If tacos are selling for $1.50, maybe Jasmine supplies $350, Ilita supplies $125, and Joshua supplies $275. You add those all together and your total market supply is 750 tacos per week.
When we graph that combined taco data, we hit upon the fundamental law of supply. And it's this: as price increases, quantity supplied increases. Price and quantity move in the exact same direction. But why? Well, mostly for 2 reasons. First, existing producers want to maximize their profits, so higher prices mean they're going to work harder to produce more. And second, market entries. When prices rise, say in something like housing construction, completely new building firms will enter the market just to get a piece of that profit, and that naturally increases the total supply.
But hey, the real world isn't always so perfectly neat. Section 4, 6 major supply shifters. Let's talk about shifting the curve. Before we actually look at those shifters, we really need to make a vital distinction here. A change in quantity supplied is just a movement along the curve we already drew, and that is driven purely by a change in price. That's it. But a change in supply, that means the actual quantity supplied at every single price change entirely because of outside factors. The whole curve literally shifts to a new position.
So when an outside factor increases supply, the entire market curve physically moves over to the right. That means at every single price point, more tacos are available. On the flip side, a decrease in supply shifts that entire curve to the left.
So what are these outside factors? They generally fall into 6 buckets. First, changes in the cost of inputs. Like if the price of coltan ore goes way up, the supply of cell phones drops. Second, the number of producers entering or leaving a market. Third, sudden changes in conditions, like a massive hurricane wiping out the Florida orange crop. Fourth, advancements in technology. Think factory robots lowering production costs. Fifth, producer expectations about future prices. And finally, number 6, government policy.
And speaking of government policy, there's a pretty fascinating little detail from the reading I want to point out. Governments frequently offer cash subsidies to help producers stay afloat. But get this, farm subsidies don't necessarily increase the supply of crops. In fact, governments will sometimes actually pay farmers not to farm their land. It sounds crazy, right? But it's done specifically to keep the overall market supply low, which in turn keeps crop prices high. It's a really striking example of how policy can actively shape the supply curve.
All right, for our final piece of the puzzle, Section 5, the elasticity of supply. Let's talk about sensitivity to price.
We know producers definitely want to react to price changes, but how fast can they actually pull it off? That's what supply elasticity measures, sensitivity. Let's compare bananas and yogurt. Yogurt is highly elastic. If the price of yogurt absolutely skyrockets today, producers can easily and quickly scale up. They just run the machines longer or buy some extra milk. But bananas? Totally inelastic. Even if banana prices double tomorrow morning, you can't magically make bananas grow any faster. It takes real time to plant and harvest crops, making it really hard to adjust supply on the fly.
Graphing these two side by side shows us exactly what this looks like. Notice the really steep slope of the banana curve? That shows that a massive 50% price increase yields only a tiny little bump in supply. That's the classic hallmark of inelasticity. Meanwhile, that flatter yogurt curve shows highly elastic supply. That exact same price jump triggers an absolute flood of new product hitting the market.
And that kind of brings us full circle. You see, economics isn't just abstract lines on a graph. It's the invisible machinery operating behind literally every store shelf and snack cart in your neighborhood. So I want to leave you with this to ponder. Think about your absolute favorite daily purchase. Maybe it's your morning coffee or your go-to lunch. How might a sudden technological advance, or maybe an unexpected international event, completely shift the supply of that exact item tomorrow? Keep your eyes open, because I guarantee you'll start seeing these supply curves shifting all around you. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the world around you.